Hi, this is Chris Brown, co-author of this Kendall Adobe Animate CC HTML5 framework, and this is a short little video to go through some of the publishing options. So first off, I'll just step through the FLA file very quickly. On the main timeline, we have a lightbox layer that just holds a simple movie clip with some graphics that are opened up in a lightbox style inside of one of the examples. We have a menu movie clip, similarly, that holds all of the menu items. We have a header layer that just holds some graphics that are there the whole time. We have a background layer that's similar. And then we have the pages layer. We go inside of that timeline, and this is where all of the examples live. So we have 17 different examples of functionality, and each one holds everything inside of a movie clip. So if I go inside of one of these, double click, now I can go in and check out the code and check out the example to make each one of these happen. So in order to publish, we have some default publish settings that we're going to get into more detail in a moment here. But first off, I'm just going to publish with the default settings just by hitting Command Return, and that will publish all the files and automatically open the app inside of your default browser. So here we have the framework that is nicely centered on the screen. It actually also is responsive, the way it'll scale down both horizontally and vertically. From here I can go ahead and use the back and next arrows to go through all of the different examples, or I can use the menu to jump directly to things if I like. Now let's take a quick look at the files in the Finder that this is actually generating for us. So just publishing does quite a bit of things. If I go back into my Finder, this is my project folder. So I'm just going to step through very quickly what each of these files and folders do. Now some of these are put here manually, however many of them are automatically generated by the publishing process. So this components folder is auto-generated from these different form components that are used inside of one of these examples. This email PHP file is manually put there, used in one of the examples to actually send an email from a server from the form. This images folder is auto-generated and pulls all of the images from the published app into this separated images folder. Our FLA folder, which is our editing folder that we actually open in Animate, it automatically generates an HTML file to hold all of the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that it generates to actually open in a browser. I'll open this up and look at the code a little closer soon. Then it also auto-generates this JavaScript file, which basically takes all the information that we set up in the timeline, the interface, and creates a JavaScript representation of it to run it all in HTML5. We have our recover file, because it's currently open and working. We have our sounds file, which is auto-generated to pull all the audio clips in and link to from the HTML file. This source file is manually put here because when we add a video and a poster for the video to show before the video loads, actually needs to be in a separate spot than this videos folder, which actually pulls a copy of the video from the source and automatically places it into the videos folder for the live running application. Now, it's a little funky that you can't just use this one in the videos folder as the source, or it will automatically disappear. You have to actually have a separate source video, and then Animate will copy it and generate it into the place that it wants for the HTML publish. And then finally, we have this template HTML, which is the template that the published file, this HTML file, bases itself on. So we can add a couple of little things in here, which I've done, that I'll show you in a moment. So let's go back into Animate, and let's start by going into the publish settings and just taking a look at what our basic options are. Okay, so with HTML5 Canvas, you should see something like this where we have JavaScript HTML checked, and in the basic settings, the output name of the HTML and JavaScript, we can just leave that default as the name of the project. Looping timeline, including hidden layers, those are just basic options we can leave checked. We're really starting to get into things is with this centering and making responsive. So I'm going to start by unchecking both of these and show you how this works. So if I uncheck both of these and then hit publish, which is the same thing as hitting command return, but since I've already done that, opened a version of my browser, now I can just hit publish, go back to my browser and hit refresh and see the difference. So by default, it just tries to stick it up in the upper left corner, and we don't have any kind of responsiveness. So as the window or the device size gets smaller, it will just scroll to be able to see the whole thing. Now, based on your application, there may be different reasons that you'd want to keep a static size in a specific spot on the page or make it responsive. There's a lot of different use cases, so we have a lot of options to do this. So going back here, let's go ahead and take center stage, but let's just center it horizontally and publish. You can go back and refresh, and now it's nicely locked to the top, but horizontally locked. If I try the vertical method, now it stays locked. Oops. There we go. I hit command return again instead of publish, which opened a new instance. So now it stays locked to the left, but now it is vertically centered. Okay. Now what we want is the best of both worlds. Well, we're going to go ahead and say both, which is how I had the initial default set. When we hit publish on both, refresh, now we'll nicely center in both of them. Now again, it's still just scrolling when it gets past the bounds rather than scaling it down. So that's what making responsive does. If we click make responsive, we can choose either just by width or by height, but I'm just going to go ahead and put both on here. Publish it. This is the way we originally had it in the default settings. When I refresh this, now when I make the browser window smaller, I can see that it actually scales the app down both vertically and horizontally as it needs to stay fitting inside of the screen, which is really nice. So then we have the scale to fit visible area. This is an interesting one because whether we choose fit in view or stretch to fit is typically not used because that has the option to actually stretch the aspect ratio of the app and make things look squished or stretched or whatnot just to fit it inside of the browser window. Fit in view is a little closer to what may be useful in some use cases. However, it can cut some things off. I'll show you the difference here. So if I publish with scale to fit and fit in view, now it's never going to scale and stretch things so they lose their aspect ratio and look awkward. However, it does its best to fill the entire browser screen. So there's a little bit of letterboxing up top here. But as I stretch things around, you can see that it does its best to fill in the actual page regardless of how large it is, which is nice. And it'll just letterbox around it. So depending on if you have a lot of vector graphics or you just want to fill the stage up as much as you can, that's a nice option. And then if I change it to stretch to fit, this might be a little awkward for our example, but what this does is actually fill the entire page with no letterboxing. So at this page, at this size, it looks okay, but as I get a little smaller, notice how it actually cuts things off. All right, so it will fill the entire thing regardless of whether, there's no letterboxing or anything, but it'll just scale and stretch. And it looks like it does not actually change the aspect ratio, but it will do is cut things off a little bit. So it could be useful if it was more of a just decorative piece or something like that. But for something that has actual important content in it, you may want to stay away from being able to cut it off like that. So I'm going to go back to setting this just to not scale to fit at all. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it center stage and make responsive. I'm going to publish this again to take a quick look. Make sure it's back to the way we expect. There we go. Okay, that's the way we want for this one. So that's how you can just kind of dock it around in different areas and make it scalable or make it fill in. There's a lot of options within these to play with and kind of publish within the HTML page the way that you would like. Now the next one down is you can create a preloader. By default, I'm just using the one it comes with. I can click preview and it will open up and show me my little animated GIF. Now you can actually create your own. If I go back and look at the Finder inside of the images, this will actually generate this preloader.gif, starts with an underscore here. What you can do is instead of the default, you can go ahead and choose browse and then just go find, if you do a quick Google search for animated GIFs or preloader GIFs, you can find just a ton of very low image size preloader GIFs that you could then just go ahead and load one on your computer and it will generate it. Now, similar to what I mentioned for the video, you will have to have that inside of the source file. If you tried to just put it inside the images file, load it the same, and give it the same name and tell it this is your preloader, same kind of issue is going to happen where Animate's going to try and recreate it, but it'll end up just making it disappear. So you'll need to put inside of your source folder your new preloader graphic, whatever that may be called, link to it here, and then once you've linked to it, then when you publish, Animate will automatically add a copy of it into your images folder. So that's a pretty cool option, and you can't see it that well when I'm just local here, but when this is actually put online, you saw it for a split second. However long it takes your project to load, could be a couple of megabytes depending on how many images, and you're not really sure if your end user is just on a regular Wi-Fi or if they're on a slower cell network. But having a little preloader there is really helpful to actually show the end user that content is indeed coming. Okay, so again, I'm just leaving the default. It's nice to have something. These image folders, these are fine just to leave the default. If for some reason you ever needed to change, but that's not usually the case, to change what name of the folder, the images, the sounds, and then even some of these Create.js assets. This Create.js is actually the JavaScript library that Adobe Animate CC uses to transform everything into HTML5 and JavaScript. Now we're going to come back to this little check mark combined into Sprite Sheets in a moment when we get over to the Sprite Sheet tab, and I'll explain a little bit of how that works. So mainly on this first page, the only thing you really have to play with is where you want it set on the page, whether it should be responsive or not, and the whole scaling and whatnot. So now if we go into the Advanced tab, now we're going to get into looking at a little bit of the code under the hood that's generated in the HTML page. Now, we are set to use a template, okay? What this means is there's a specific HTML page that has certain elements in it that CC generates all the time, and we also added a couple of our own styles to it, so every time we republish and it regenerates an HTML file, there's certain elements that we want in there that it'll leave in there, okay? I'm going to show you what that means. Now, this started just by clicking Export. And by clicking export, it went ahead and I created this template.html file. Now I'm going to open this template.html file inside of my code editor. I use Sublime Text. Adobe has a good one with their creative suite called Brackets. You can really use any text editor. And what this is it explains a little bit of the notes, but there are these things called tokens that start with a $, and these are all items that Animate, when published, actually adds code to all of these little white things that have little tokens on them and puts in the necessary code to run all of the JavaScript, all the styles, all of the scripts that some of these publishing methods do. Now, what this template allows us to do, there's a couple of little spots where it says write your code here, write your code here. Really that's just before and after the auto-generated scripts. But what we've done is add a couple of styles here that we want there the whole time, and these styles allow us to just have a background image that doesn't repeat and that stays horizontally centered 50%. We also have a backup background color to show you how to remove the image if you want just a background color. And then very importantly, we have this simple little line of a canvas style telling the WebKit tap highlight color to be transparent. This fixes an issue that when you view applications built through this framework on an Android mobile device, without this style, you'll see a little blink whenever you touch a button, and this makes it so that little blink goes away. All right, so this is really our only custom code that we've added to the template. We could find other things to add, other styles, other even HTML elements down here if we wanted when we auto-generate the file, but for now, these are enough just to get us started. So with this template, now I also have open the actual HTML file that's generated. So let's take a look. So going from this template, now if I click over to the HTML file that was generated, I can see that there aren't any more tokens. There's just all this code. So most of this code is what Animate auto-generates for us. Okay, so I'm just going to step through a little bit of this very briefly. So up to this point, we could go ahead and we could change the title to be whatever we name. This is what shows up at the top of the browser when you open it in your browser. Here's our initial styles. We'll go ahead and edit these in a moment, and I'll show you what changing some of these works. Now this style is added automatically when we set it to center both ways. This is tagging a couple of the HTML elements that are actually holding our canvas down here at the bottom. And this is telling them basically to center based on these CSS rules. So we can adjust these, and I'll show you a way to, for example, make it centered horizontally but only be a specific pixel amount down from the top in case maybe you wanted to match up with the background image or something like that. Now after our styles, now we start to get into our script tags that it automatically adds in our create.js. Again, this is the framework that kind of allows all of this interface stuff to be ported into HTML5. Now we have a lot of functions and JavaScript here that has to do with the web fonts. We have 3 different web fonts included in the framework, and it shows you how to do so. But part of that is when you add a web font, it automatically adds in all of these different objects. I got these from Google Fonts. So all of this code from here, see load fonts, font available, checking fonts, font families, and then these different styles. And then it's adding CSS styles to actually add the font families, all 3 of them. So all the way down to here, all of this grouping is just adding in our dynamic web fonts. If I look back at our template, I can see that one of these, let's see, our library scripts, animate scripts, center scripts. As we go down here, let's see, looks like I can't find the exact, let's see, the exact temp token that is actually creating those, but it's in there. It's probably buried inside of maybe the animate CC scripts token. This has all kinds of things inside of that. So after we get through this, then there's some more scripts. Here it imports our JavaScript file that actually creates all of the JavaScript from our interface. And then after that, it creates some functions that help with the responsiveness, help with the loading of the actual canvas element into the HTML, and also help, again, with some of the placement. So we get through all of this, handling the file load, handling the file complete, just sets up all of this JavaScript inside of it. Here's our make responsive function that handles all of the resizing. So there's a ton of code that it automatically generates for us from this template. And then finally at the bottom is where we have our HTML tags. After all of the styles and all of the scripts, and these HTML tags actually embed the HTML canvas element into the page. And these have all of the sizes. Our size is set to 980 by 520. So if we change this width and height here and then republished, the 4 or 5 times that this shows up would all be replaced and everything will work just fine. So now let me show you what happens if we change a couple of the styles here. Now everything else on this page, with the exception of these top styles, should pretty much just leave alone. This is all auto-generated. This makes everything work without you having to know necessarily what's going on under the hood. I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of JavaScript that gets automatically added to this index file that helps piece it all together, in addition to the massive, because this file is only, what, a couple hundred lines long. Well, our huge framework.js file that takes all of the interface elements and puts them into one massive JavaScript file, this is where it turns everything into HTML5, and this is actually thousands and thousands of lines of code. So this you should never have to edit, but it is indeed included, and that's ultimately what's going on when you publish, is it's taking all the interface information that you've built on the timeline and with symbols and keyframes and tweens and all of that, and it converts it all into JavaScript code. So now let me show you real quick how to adjust a couple of these styles. So let's say that right now we're calling a background image from our images folder. So that's explicitly set in there. We have our background image here. And if I look at the browser, that's what it looks like. Now, if I don't want a background image and I just want a background color, that's easy enough. I can go into my HTML file and I can just remove all of this before the color. So if I take all that out and just leave the background color, this is a hex color, this is actually black, and I just leave the semicolon to end the line. If I save this file, then go back and refresh, now I can see that I have just a black background color. If I wanted to change this, let's make it bright red. I can save that with a bright red hex value, refresh, and now I have a bright red background color. So it's that easy just to have any kind of background color or a background image. I'm going to undo, set that back, save it again, just make sure my nice background image comes back. Very nice. So now the other thing is, what if you don't want to center it either horizontally or vertically or both? What if you're trying to match it specifically to a spot on the background? That's common. To want it to stay, now the background image is already locked horizontally because of the way we have this 50% after the no repeat property. And we're locking the movie horizontally, but let's say we want to keep it at the exact same spot vertically so we could possibly match it to a background. All we'd have to do is go in, and in this auto-generated code, we can, that's centering it horizontally and vertically. Now, if you were to play with those options, you would see that if you don't center anything, it just won't put this style in. If you center just horizontally, it'll take out the top and bottom. So let's try that first. Let's just take out the top and bottom margins that say they're at 0 and just leave left and right. If I save that now and refresh it, now it locks it to the top. So this is the exact same thing as telling it just to lock or to center horizontally. But to bring it down from the top there, what we can do is in our margin, instead of saying auto, which covers top, left, bottom, and right, we can actually put a pixel amount in first. I'm going to put 50 pixels and then auto. So this 50 pixels will now tell me how much I want it specifically down from the top, and then all of the other areas will be auto. So if I save this and refresh it, now all of a sudden I have a nice 50 pixel barrier at the top, and it locks there no matter what I do as far as the responsiveness, and it's just nice and stuck in the center. So this is a way that I could indeed match my application specifically to the background. And sometimes it's nice having a square, application window to be able to kind of bleed things into the background and make it look a little nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and undo back to the way that was. Just want to point out how that works. Save it. Make sure that we're back where we started. Okay, so let's go in and look at the rest of the publishing options now inside of Animate. So as we move down, inside Advanced, what I just showed you is how I'm using the template. So I initially exported it to get that template file with all of the tokens in it, and then I just added my couple of styles here. so that every single time it generates, it will generate all this stuff, but it also includes my styles that I can go in and leave as they are, or I could change the template if I wanted. I could go into the template file, and if I know I always want no background image and just a background color, then every time I publish, I won't have to go into the HTML file and change it again. So inside of here, we're telling it to use our specific template that has our styles. We're also telling it to override the HTML file on publish. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword. If you are already familiar and know what you're doing, it is okay to uncheck this, so every time you publish, any small changes you made to the HTML template, like the styles and whatnot, won't keep getting overwritten every time. But it is recommended to leave it checked until you've published enough and kind of understand what's going on under the hood a little, because a lot of different changes in the interface as far as fonts or videos or sounds, different things will automatically add or remove JavaScript to the file, so it's a good idea to kind of let the program overwrite it and write what needs to be written. Okay. The rest of these down here, advanced JavaScript options, the hosted libraries, compact shapes, multi-frame bounds, the namespaces, none of this you really need to deal with. These are just, if you are a heavy JavaScript programmer, you could change some of these namespaces to have some of your hand programming, maybe follow your own design patterns rather than what Create.js has laid out. So again, the basic tab really helps you set up how it's laid into the HTML page, including the preloader and whatnot. The advanced tab lets you work with a template for the HTML file and do some of the custom code. Then we get into the Sprite Sheets tab. Now let's go back to the basic tab because I want to show you that this combine image assets into Sprite Sheets is the exact same checkbox as this one on the basic tab, combine into Sprite Sheet. So if I check that, we go back to this, now all of a sudden this one's checked and it's showing us this. Now if you're not familiar with the concept of a sprite sheet is used a lot in games where you'll have a lot of different graphics, possibly different animated poses of the same character, all saved onto a single image file that the computer then parses into pieces. And that ultimately ends up being faster for the game engine or for the browser to call one image file that has a lot of different images kind of matrixed onto it rather than to call a bunch of separate images. We can get smaller file sizes, we can get better performance. It's a bit of a kind of trial and error depending on your type of graphics to see which one works for you. I just want to show you the options and how they work. So by default, for ours, we did not have combined image assets into Sprite Sheet. So what that does is takes all the images throughout the project and will actually render them and put them individually in the images folder. So if I take a look at my images folder, I can see the preloader GIF that it automatically generates. This background image is one of the three that are actually in the application that this exported as a separate image. Our bg.jpg, this is our background that we explicitly set there for our HTML file. This doesn't get auto-generated. This was manually put there as our background image. Our digital media logo and our KCAD logo are both inside of it that are automatically pulled out. And then our poster image, this is the image for our video that we want to show up until the video is actually loaded. Now, every one of these except for the background image for the HTML are actually auto-generated into this folder. So if I go in and delete the preloader, the background, both logos, and the poster, I'm going to go publish this again, and it'll actually put these in again. Now, I'm going to choose to combine into a sprite sheet. I'm just going to leave it the default as a PNG, and go ahead and hit publish, and I'll show you the difference. Okay, now if I go back and refresh, nothing looks different as far as the application is concerned. But inside of the images folder, we have less images now. We have our background image that we left there and didn't do anything with. Both our preloader and our poster GIF are there again. Now again, the poster comes from the source file. Both the video and the poster for the video need to be in the source folder so it can copy it from somewhere into here. Would be the same thing with the preloader. There is no source for the preloader because I'm just using the default, but if you used your own preloader GIF, you again would want to have that inside of the source folder so that it would automatically copy it from there into the images. But now we have this single PNG file with an underscore atlas, and this is our sprite sheet. So if I open this, this is one single image file that holds all three of these files together. Okay, now the difference between using a PNG and a JPEG is you may get better file size and performance out of a JPEG, but you will not get any transparency. Okay, so I'm going to show you the difference here. Now this is helpful. This is a 200 kilobyte ping image. Because there's only 3 graphics, it doesn't really make sense in this application to use a sprite sheet. But if we were doing more heavy character animation or a lot of bitmaps or something like that, it may very well give us better performance. So ultimately it may just be trying it both ways, testing your file size, testing your performance. I've actually ran into issues where applications with a lot of large images would have trouble showing up after publishing on screen, and we found that turning off sprite sheet generation and just having it build the individual files would take care of that. So if you see your graphics disappearing and you're not getting any errors in your console and you're not sure why, maybe try turning off sprite sheet and see if that helps. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to change to the JPEG option. Actually, I'm going to go in here and just delete my one ping sprite sheet here. I'll let it overwrite these 3 files. But if I set it to a JPEG and hit publish, now when I go back and look, now I can see that I have a JPEG. Instead of 200K, it's 96K, so it's half the size. However, what I really can't see is there's no transparency here. So if I go in and refresh my page, oops, trying to open a new browser. Let's try this again. There we go. Now I can see the issue with using JPEGs here, is I lost the transparency on my graphics, even though I got a smaller file size. So one nice option is we can actually do both. I'm going to go back here, get rid of my JPEG, and this time I'm going to tell it to use both. And you can set, as far as the quality, when you're using a ping, try 8-bit first. If that doesn't look good enough, then you can go to 24-bit, but you'll lose a bit of quality, or you'll gain quality, but you'll lose a bit of performance. You always want to try the lowest quality and best performance first. Same with the JPEG settings. The initial quality of 80% is usually pretty good. Sometimes you want to go down a little bit from there. The actual max size, we haven't done a lot of testing. If doing smaller sizes, we're just leaving that at the default. That's how big your actual sprite sheet can get before it'll create more than one of them. But if we choose both, it'll actually try to intelligently create JPEG sprite sheet and ping sprite sheets where necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and hit publish on both. First I'll refresh this and see that my pings have their transparency back. Looks nice and clean. If I go look into my file folder, I can see that, okay, it created a single background JPEG that didn't need a sprite sheet because it's just a single image, and then it put my 2 pings, combined these 2 into a sprite sheet. Okay, so anyway, there's a lot of options here. I'm going to delete these once more and just go set this back to the default where I'm not going to combine anything into sprite sheets. Hit publish. And now I can see that it has the background image and then each logo individually. So again, the sprite sheet thing can give you a lot of gains in file size and performance, but it may take a little bit of finicking to see what works as far as PNGs versus JPEGs for your own specific graphics, whether you want sprite sheets, whether you don't. Just try it both ways, but now at least if you understand how that works. Okay, the final tab is the web fonts. When you attach web fonts, the web fonts we've attached inside of here, we actually use Google Fonts, so you don't need to worry about this tab. That's what we recommend. If you choose to use a typekit font, which comes with Adobe CC, then you'll have to enter in the URL where your thing will be hosted, and there's just a little bit more red tape to be able to get a typekit font than there is a free Google font. So we just recommend using Google Fonts, ignoring this basically. But it is possible to use if you wanted to get into it and click this and learn a little bit more about how it works. So I'm going to save this, and the final thing I want to show you is with all of these files going on here, at some point you're going to want to publish this onto an actual web server, a hosted web server, so this can be seen from the internet and not just locally. So some of these files are needed, some are not. I just want to show you which ones you need to copy over the web server and which ones you wouldn't have to. So you don't necessarily want to copy everything if you don't need. So very quickly, I'm just going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it web server. And this is going to represent the place on the server where you'd FTP in and have a folder where you're actually putting your application online. Okay, when you're at that point, you're ready to actually put it into a live online space through an FTP web server. Then I'll start at the top. We do want this components folder. These are runtime JavaScript libraries that are necessary to run some of the form components. We definitely want to include this email PHP file. This is what the form example that will actually email out your form results to you, as long as you go inside the file and put your own email address in there instead of the placeholder. That's necessary. That PHP file will not even function locally online. That will need to be on a server for it to work properly and send out the email. We do want to include the entire images folder. These are all images that are linked to from your HTML file. We can skip the FLA. We do not need the editor file that you'd open and animate on the web. We don't need that at all. And we also wouldn't need a recover file. I just hit save, so it made my recover go away. But we also wouldn't need the recover file either, so I can skip that. Definitely want the HTML and the JavaScript file. This is what you open in the browser, and this is holding a lot of the information. Definitely want the sounds folder. That's going to hold any audio clips that are going to be linked to the HTML file in the framework. We can skip the source. That right now is just the video and the poster. Could also be your preloader, could be other sounds. Anything in that source folder is not explicitly being linked to. All that's being copied into the images or into the video. So we can leave the source folder off the server. We can also leave the template HTML off. That's just what generates our HTML. We don't need to bring that. We do want the videos folder because any videos, it's going to actually copy from your source into that. So these are really the files that are necessary. I'm going to go ahead and copy these with Command-C, go into my web server folder, and paste them. And now I have the files that I would need to put on the web server. One thing that would probably make sense is to change the name of the HTML file at this point from whatever the name of the application is to index.html. What that does when you put this on a web server is when you go to, so let's say we put this on kendallweblab.com/HTML5 framework. Well, inside of that folder, kendallweblab.com/HTML5 framework, we don't want to also have to put /HTML5 framework / that whole file name.html. If you name it index.html, then the browser just knows that it will automatically open any file named index for that folder. So typically when you upload something to a web folder, the HTML file that you want to open right away, when you go to that folder in the browser, you name index and it will automatically open. So that's it. Hopefully that sheds a little light on some of the publishing process for the HTML5 framework.